At just 12 years old, he sat in that courtroom with a smile that made everyone's skin crawl. While other kids his age worried about homework and video games, this boy had been living out twisted fantasies that would haunt investigators for years. He genuinely believed he was too young to face real consequences, that his age would be his get-out-of-jail-free card. What he didn't know was that one perfect fingerprint had already sealed his fate. That tiny piece of evidence would be enough to convince a judge that some monsters come in small packages, and this one needed to be locked away before he could hurt anyone else. How does a child become a monster, and how does that monster learn to hide behind the innocent face of a 12-year-old boy? This was the question that would haunt a city, a question born from an act of violence so depraved it seemed to defy all logic and human understanding. The crime was not a product of youthful anger or a fleeting moment of bad judgment. It was the calculated and sadistic work of a predator who had been honing his dark desires in secret for years. The victim, a kind young man with a bright future, was not chosen for any reason other than his availability, a random target selected to satisfy an unspeakable hunger for power and control. The city of Tampa, Florida, a place of vibrant sun-drenched days and neon-soaked nights, has always harbored a shadowy underbelly of crime and corruption beneath its glittering facade. It is a city of extremes, where immense wealth and desperate poverty coexist, creating a landscape where the unthinkable can and often does happen. But even for a city accustomed to violence, the murder of Michael Thompson was something different, something that felt like a tear in the very fabric of the community. The crime scene, a quiet apartment in a working-class neighborhood, became the epicenter of a story that would expose a level of evil few could have imagined possible in a child. Michael Thompson was 24 years old, a recent graduate who worked 2 jobs to support his ailing mother, a young man known for his gentle spirit and his unwavering optimism. He was the kind of person who saw the good in everyone, a quality that would, in the end, make him fatally vulnerable to the predator who crossed his path. Michael had no enemies, no dark secrets, no connection to the city's criminal underworld. He was simply a good person in the wrong place at the very worst time. His death was a senseless and brutal erasure of a life that was just beginning, a life full of promise and potential. The perpetrator was Brandon Mitchell, a 12-year-old boy from a seemingly normal suburban family, a child who, on the surface, was utterly unremarkable. He was quiet, a decent student, a boy who spent his afternoons playing video games and riding his bike through the manicured streets of his neighborhood. But beneath this veneer of childhood innocence, a monstrous ideology was taking root, a belief that he was superior to others, that he had the right to exert ultimate control over another human being. The abduction and murder of Michael Thompson was not an impulse. It was the culmination of months of planning and years of fantasizing. The first horrifying step in what he imagined would be a long and celebrated career as a killer. The details of the crime were as meticulous as they were horrifying, revealing a level of premeditation that was staggering in a 12-year-old. Brandon had stalked his victim for days, learning his routine, mapping his movements, and choosing the perfect moment to strike. He had used a ruse, a feigned cry for help, to lure Michael into a secluded area, exploiting his victim's kindness and compassion as a weapon against him. The act itself was one of pure sadism, a prolonged and brutal assault designed to maximize Michael's terror and to give Brandon the ultimate thrill of holding another person's life in his hands. Investigators arriving at the scene were confronted with a level of brutality that would stay with them for the rest of their careers. The evidence spoke not of a struggle, but of a systematic and controlled torture, the work of a killer who was not just taking a life, but savoring the process. It was clear that the motive was not robbery or revenge, but something far more sinister, the simple, unadulterated pleasure of inflicting pain and asserting absolute dominance. This was a trophy killing in its purest form, an act committed solely for the perpetrator's own twisted gratification. The initial investigation was a confusing and frustrating search for a ghost, a killer with no apparent motive and no connection to the victim. The detectives of the Tampa Police Department worked tirelessly chasing down leads that went nowhere, interviewing friends and family who could offer no insight into why anyone would want to harm a person as universally loved as Michael. The city held its breath, gripped by the fear of a random, unseen killer who could strike anyone at any time. A monster who had emerged from the city's shadowy underbelly to commit an act of incomprehensible evil. The community's reaction was one of profound shock and grief, a city united in its sorrow for a young man who represented the very best of Tampa. Vigils were held and memorials grew on the street where Michael had last been seen, a testament to the deep and personal impact of his death. In a city often divided by culture and class, the murder of Michael Thompson became a unifying tragedy, a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the ever-present potential for darkness to encroach on the sun-drenched streets of paradise. The psychological profile of the killer was a chilling portrait of a narcissistic and sadistic personality, someone who would feel no remorse and would likely relish the attention his crime was receiving. They knew they were not hunting for a common criminal. They were hunting for a predator of the highest order, someone who saw other people not as human beings, but as objects to be used and discarded for their own amusement. They had no idea that the monster they were looking for was a 12-year-old boy, a child who was at that very moment watching the news reports of his own crime with a sense of pride and accomplishment. The full weight of the tragedy settled upon the city as days turned into weeks, with no arrest. The vibrant, carefree atmosphere of Tampa was replaced by a palpable sense of unease, a community looking over its shoulder, wondering where the monster would strike next. The murder had exposed the dark side of the city's paradise, the hidden corruption that could allow such an evil to fester in plain sight. Little did they know that the evil was not hiding in the shadows of a back alley, but in a child's bedroom in a quiet suburban home, a child who was dreaming of his next kill. The breakthrough in the case came from a single overlooked piece of evidence, a clear fingerprint lifted from a discarded soda bottle found near the abduction site. For weeks, it had sat in a database unmatched to any known criminals, a silent and frustrating dead end. But a routine cross-check with other databases, including those for juvenile offenders, yielded a stunning and unbelievable hit. The fingerprint belonged to Brandon Mitchell, a 12-year-old boy with no criminal record, a child who had never even been in trouble at school. The arrest of a child for such a monstrous crime sent a shockwave through the Tampa Police Department and the entire city. Detectives, hardened by years of dealing with the worst of humanity, struggled to comprehend the possibility that a boy who had not yet reached puberty could be capable of such calculated sadism. They approached his family's home with a sense of dread and disbelief, their minds racing to find some other explanation, some mistake in the system. But the science was irrefutable. The fingerprint was a perfect match. When Detective Ryan Foster and his partner arrived at the Mitchell suburban home, they were greeted with a scene of perfect domesticity. The lawn was neatly manicured, a bicycle lay on its side in the driveway, and through the window they could see Brandon sitting on the couch playing a video game. As they led him away, his parents were a picture of confusion and outrage, screaming about terrible harassment and a mistake. Brandon, however, remained uncannily calm, his expression one of mild curiosity, as if this was all just an interesting and unexpected diversion from his afternoon. In the sterile, windowless interrogation room, the boy's composure did not break. It hardened into an icy and arrogant confidence. Seated across from Detective Foster, a man with 2 decades of experience in getting criminals to talk, Brandon seemed not intimidated, but amused. He was not a scared child, and over his head. He was a predator in his element, a performer who had finally been given the stage he had always craved. The confession, when it came, was not a tearful admission of guilt, but a boastful and detailed recitation of his crime. He confessed with relish, a small knowing smile playing on his lips as he recounted the most gruesome and sadistic details of Michael's final moments. He spoke with the calm, analytical detachment of a scientist, describing an experiment, providing information that only the killer could know. He corrected the detectives on minor details of the crime scene, his memory perfect, his pride in his work evident in every word. He was not just confessing to a murder, he was performing, turning the interrogation into a showcase for his own perceived brilliance and cruelty. The most chilling aspect of his confession was his complete and total lack of remorse. He spoke of his victim not as a person, but as a thing, an object that he had used to achieve a desired sensation. He described Michael's pleas for his life with a theatrical sigh of boredom, as if they were a minor annoyance in an otherwise perfect experience. Detective Foster, a man who had stared into the eyes of countless killers, found himself looking at something he had never seen before, a complete void